But we're going to be hearing, I think, about content having to do with our ethical responsibilities to responding in times of crisis in our communities. So I'm going to introduce my dear colleague, whom I've been so privileged to work with over the last 8 years, and Associate Professor Andrew Edwards. Reverend Edwards, please take the stand and introduce our first plenary speaker.
Greetings, my friends. You're a little quiet. Greetings, my friends. All right, very good. I have the opportunity to introduce our plenary speaker, one who I've known for several years, none other than Reverend Lorenzo Norris. And I think it's befitting that we put this into context. Last year, our county executive was the plenary speaker. And he spoke on human needs, social justice, and the political process. And he was trying to link those three things. So Dr. Dover, you know, he's a human needs person. So now we're looking at human needs, social justice, and the religious foundations. And that's what our speaker will be looking at. He'll be looking at the interchange and the relationship and the connection among those three things: human needs, social justice, and the religious systems. Now, our speaker, Reverend Norris, is really the personification of those three things. His life and his volunteer efforts and some of his work experience has been around human needs. As a matter of fact, when I first met him about 30 years ago, he and another individual, they were going to organize a telephone counseling program. And they were going to contact all the churches and people who were going through some kind of a crisis. They were going to get involved with this telephone counseling program. So he has been committed to human needs for decades. He is also committed to social justice, and he is also obviously a person who has roots in religious systems. So I said that he is the personification of those three things. I mentioned that he is Reverend Norris, which means he is ordained as a Protestant clergyman. But not only does he have those credentials, but he is also a social worker. He's a social worker. Say no more. I'll say one more about that. Has an MSSA from Case Western Reserve University in Cleveland, Ohio. So he is indeed a social worker from the School of Applied Social Sciences. Now, all of us are familiar with some of the controversial and conflictual kind of things going on in metropolitan Cleveland. The Cleveland police using excessive force and needing some change in our criminal justice system. Well, Reverend Norris has a leadership role in a comprehensive group that's referred to as the Cleveland Clergy Alliance. That is a multifaceted, energetic advocacy group that represents many, many different faith organizations. So I said that his life is a personification of human needs, social justice, and religious systems. So I mentioned those things because it says something about who he is. And it also says something about why Dr. Dover wanted him to be the plenary speaker, so that the various workshops and the brainstorming sessions that you have had can kind of like come together now as he speaks from his heart and talks about from his own way and his experience human needs and social justice and religious systems. So I have nothing else to say, but the next voice you will hear will be none other than my personal friend, Reverend Lorenzo Norris, the social worker.
Let me first of all say to the Reverend Dr. Andrew Edwards, thank you for a fine introduction. My mother, certainly would say, who was that guy you was talking about? Let me say, I'd like to, first of all, thank this leadership team, conference team, Mike, conference coordinator, Michelle, and certainly Professor Emeritus Edward McKinney, who was my student advisor and field supervisor at CASE during my year there in social work. Certainly, I'd like to certainly thank Department of Senior and Adult Services. Some of the members are here, and certainly to Samantha Brooks, who I believe received the Social Worker of the Year. Give her a hand, and many honorees. Let me want to do several things, and understand I have 25 minutes, and I'm going to stay within that frame. I want to talk about Cleveland Clergy Alliance just for a few moments, and then I want to talk about two things: poverty, and then education that has a serious impact upon what you and I do. One of the things, the first thing, and then I want to talk about the 1,000 March this coming Saturday at noon. Hands up, don't shoot. I can't breathe. Not only do black men's lives matter, but all lives matter. Cleveland Clergy Alliance is made up of interfaith denominations across the line that comes together for social justice, economic justice, to, if you will, empower the faith-based community to get involved in the various needs in the community. We do things such as Central State University, for the first time historically, became a land-grant college. That was the work of Cleveland Clergy Alliance behind the scene, working with politicians nationally and locally in this community. We also do innovative things such as the first women reentry program last year at Tri-C for the first time in this county. And we presently has a partnership with the Department of Adult and Senior Services that we're doing now. So we kind of do innovative things. We want to, if you will, meet the needs. We also try to get dollars and grants for faith-based organizations that are upstarting, that are new and innovative, by working with the state, county, and local officials. But, you know, one of the things, I was shocked and gracious, and thank you for this invitation, and I wonder, how did a country boy from Alabama get up here? And the only reason I could think of was that I'm a social worker. And social workers love social workers. So let me, in a way, talk about what this thing that we are facing presently. Poverty in the state of Ohio, number of Ohioans who live in poverty will field Ohio football stadium more than 17 times, according to this year's State of Poverty report, compiled by the Ohio Association of Community Action Agency. Not only that, healthcare system trying to cut costs because now 11 million Americans have joined the Medicaid roll since the major provision of Affordable Care Act went into effect. Look for a minute at our inequality in education funding, short changes in America's future. When we look at the President Lyndon B. Johnson signed the Elementary and Secondary Education Act into law April 11, 1965. The purpose of that law was primarily to close the educational achievement gap between children from lower and higher income families. 50 years later now, Congress currently considering a reorganization of that law. The gap in educational opportunity is growing wider. Students of color, Black and Hispanic, for the first time in our major nation recent survey shows that the majority of all public schools students are low income. In addition to education statistics estimate that during 2013-2014 school year, a majority of 51% of public school students were deemed eligible for free reduced price, a meal, common indication of poverty. The question that you ask is social work really meeting the needs? Well, I would kind of flip it a different way. If social workers did not meet needs, then this nation or this society that we live in would be doomed. Let me press my point here. When you look at the social worker, from the birth of a baby, teen to adults, health care, when you look at those that are in prison, those incarcerated, those, if you will, that are trying to reenter the community, a social worker is there. There is nowhere throughout our community where you do not need a social worker. For example, my mother is 88, and just yesterday I had to make a decision to keep her in the home or place her in a nursing home. I needed help from a social worker. Let me say to you, I was born in Dallas County, Alabama, which is Selma. Born from a midwife, reared in Jefferson County, Birmingham, Alabama. Born in poverty, lived what they call a shotgun house, where you can look through the front door and go all the way to the back door. No cold, just cold water. Hot water, you had to take cold water and put it in a tub after you heat it up to take a bath. Poverty, back in all the way from the 30s and on through the Depression, has been a shackle for those that are the very least of society. I think social worker brings, if you will, to today a need to address every issue there is. If it wasn't for the social worker, where would society be today? You are important. You are needed. You make a difference throughout families, with young people, with senior citizens. You are there on the front line changing things for people. Social work matters. Poverty in education. Let me get away from the text, my mind, just for a few moments. How many minutes I got, Rev? Well, just keep me on the clock. Why raise poverty and link to education? Because poverty, if you will, when you look at those that we serve, the very least of those, many times that they cannot really lift themselves up by their bootstraps. But you, the social worker, that sat with them, become a mother and a father to some of them and a mentor. You, the social worker, gives them hope and encouragement in spite of a mother not being there, in spite of a father not being there, in spite of a public school system that is not educating our children. You encourage them to go on to college, to seek a career. Social workers are important. In terms of the violence that we see in this society today, it's a link of poverty as well as education. The question is, I think, for social workers and for agencies, is that we must not give way to be measured by a MBA standard. You know how you write grants, and at the end of the grant they say be evaluated. How can you possibly evaluate in a year or two a child that has been labeled mentally dysfunctional, have not been in school, mother is not there, sometimes only the extended family is there? It takes more, if you will, than 1 year. The social worker who toils, who does not make a loss of money, the social worker who is an advocate for policy and change, the social worker that cries with their clients, the social worker that after work gets in a car and goes around the corner to see if the little child is still committed or the child is in tutoring such. The social worker makes a difference and builds our community. One of the things I think is that we need to stop looking at things quantitatively. You know, we got to get so many numbers, because we got to fill the grant, so we don't take the time to do what we need to do. Because we know if we don't get the funding and this and that, and policies don't change, that more than likely we won't help that client or we won't have a job. We need to tell our public officials and we need to tell Wall Street. Come on with me, somebody. We need to, that you're not going to go into urban areas. You're not going to go into public school. And suddenly the Tea Party is not going to do social work. not going to roll up their sleeves and deal with a drug addict. Not going to take the time to sit down with one that has been incarcerated for a number of years and now trying to get started again. But every time they knock on somebody's door, they say, you have a felon, you cannot work. That psychological means that I cannot be a man. I cannot take care of my family, my mother, my children, because I cannot find fair employment. We need to become more active. Let me take just for a moment from Matthew. I think the 25th chapter, if I may, because oftentimes one might wonder how can faith and social work come together. And I think around the 30th verse, the Galilean minister and teacher, the one that walked on water, kind of enlightened us. He said when you come into his kingdom, he comes with an angel. I'm just paraphrasing. He set one on the left and the right hand. And he began to say to those on the right side, when I was hungry, you gave me meat. When I was thirsty, you gave me drink. When I was a stranger, you took me in. Naked, and you enclosed me. When I was sick, you came to visit me. When I was in prison, you came unto me. That sounds like a social worker to me. Sound like a social worker to me. But they say, these social workers says to them, when did we see you hungry? When did we see you thirsty and gave you some water? When did we see you a stranger and took you in, naked and clothed you? And when did we see you, Lord, when you was in prison and came unto you? And it says that the king said unto them, said, when you have done these things, when you have done these things to the very least of those that are poor, those that are in poverty, those that lack the education, when you have done these things to them, you have also done them unto me. Reverend Martin Luther King, one of the greatest quotes, he said, the ultimate measure of a man is now where he stands in the moments of comfort and convenience, but where he stands at the time of challenge and controversy. Let me close because we got challenges and controversy. I got 2 minutes. Thank you. I won't get a chance to sing Amazing Grace, huh? Yeah. We are this Saturday gathering 1,000 plus at City Hall. And the reason gathering, because all lives matter. I know everyone in this room has seen Ferguson, New York, Wisconsin, Trayvon Martin, 137 shots. And throughout this nation, people have demonstrated en masse and lifted their voices. White, black, Hispanics, Jewish, Catholic have came together. But in Cleveland, Ohio, where a 12-year-old child, and I I probably was on some social worker list of clients. Tanisha Anderson was at some mental health center. Timothy Russell and Melissa Williams probably had been through some drug court or somewhere and came through welfare line for food stamps. And Cleveland, Ohio, have not said a word. Haven't said a thing. So we're going to come together, make our recommendations, and cry out. If we, as social workers, don't become advocates, then there will be no change in Cleveland, nor in this nation. And remember, it was a community organizer. They stood up and said, health care is not a privilege, but it's a right. God bless you.
Good afternoon. I'm Michelle Lard. I'm on the planning committee for the conference. I want to impart with you, these are some hard shoes that feel and come behind, but there is an internationally known social work scholar and activist, and his name is Richard Cloward. And he said, you cannot be a social worker unless you believe in social change and are willing to do something about your beliefs. So come out on Saturday and help do something. I'm going to introduce the next speaker. Her name is Ms. Margaret Mitchell. She is the president and CEO of the YWCA of Greater Cleveland since 2011. She is recognized in Profiles in Diversity Journal, the September 2012 issue, as a woman worth watching. She graduated from Hampton University, and her mission's work is to eliminate racism and to empower women. Please give a warm welcome to Ms. Margaret Mitchell.
Thank you, Michelle. I am so excited to be here this afternoon. It's really an honor to come before you. I want to tell you that I am not a social worker, but my team will tell you I play one every day. And I'm pretty good. Am I not pretty good? Because I love what you do. And I am very passionate about the work that you engage in every day, the way you touch the lives and the hearts of people. As the CEO for the YWCA, I always like to tell people that we are not your mother's YWCA. You cannot come to our building and jump in the pool. You are not going to be able to work out. We are not what we affectionately call the swim and gym business. And we are definitely not the YMCA. We got divorced years ago, decades ago. They got the property and the money, and we got the kids. It's true. It's true. But we love those kids. The work that we do really centers around working with the homeless. And we have 23 permanent supportive housing apartments at our facility at 40th and Prospect. And we house young people who many of whom have aged out of foster care, all have been homeless. 100% have a disability. Typically, that's a mental health disability. And I'm very passionate about those with mental health. We also have a preschool, and this past July, we transitioned our preschool into a therapeutic model to serve homeless families. Do you know that last year there were nearly 500 children under the age of 5 that were homeless with their parent? And they are homeless and in transitional housing for up to 142 days in this county. And there was no service for those families in terms of preschool education. Teresa, who is here today, our VP of programs, a gifted clinician and a dear friend. She and I were at a conference in Seattle, and we had been looking at our preschool and really wrestling with it, trying to decide what to do. And we had hired a consultant, and we really thought about exiting the business. You know, we weren't Catholic Charities. We don't have all those preschools. We weren't the centers. We weren't the YMCA with multiple sites that had been scaled. That's not who we were. We had one preschool. And I thought, wow, maybe we need to get out of this business. And we're sitting in this conference, and suddenly it hits me, and I could hear it and feel it clear as day. And I heard a voice say to me, you need to turn the preschool into a preschool to serve homeless families. And I leaned over and wrote that down. Is this not true? On a piece of paper. And she said, she looked at me and she said, yeah, I think we could do that. 3 seconds later, the gentleman at the podium from HUD said, I was just in Washington, D.C. and visited preschool for homeless children. We nearly fell off our chair. We knew that something bigger than ourselves wanted this for these children in our county. And early on, and at several points along the way, you know, people will tell you no. You know, obstinates will come up and rear its face. But we kept plugging ahead, and we're so proud of that work. We're just as proud of Independence Place and NIA, which is our housing and our supportive services, and we also lead a work in this community called A Place for Me. And A Place for Me is not a physical space, but it is an idea that all young people who have been in foster care or aged out or find themselves homeless have a right and an ability to find their place in this community with housing and employment and education and everything that they need. And that work is also led by a very gifted project manager, Kate Lodge. And so those are our social service pieces, our mission around eliminating racism and empowering women. So, you know, when you start talking about racism, people start backing up away from you. You know, I mean, it's the last thing people want to talk about. And for years, the YWCA didn't have the courage to talk about it either. And this past February, we were able to bring a work to the community called It's Time to Talk. 300 people came to talk about racism, and the conversation is still continuing because it must continue. You know, Reverend Norris, as you talked about policing, one of the things that you have to look at when you look at policing is that at least half of all of those killed by police this year had been diagnosed with mental illness. You already knew that before I said it. You know it every time you see another shooting because you're social workers. The change that has to happen, and one of the things that we are advocating at the YWCA, and I hope that this group will join us, as Cleveland has a Department of Justice report which is not such a good thing. But we can make it a good thing by using this and being able to advocate for what's in the consent decree. And one of the things that must go in the consent decree, and one of the things we have got to talk about, each of us here, is more women and people of color in police departments. And we need more social workers. We have to disrupt the way policing, we have to move away from the paramilitary police department and have a police department that is more built on community and a social work model. We need more women and more people of color. So you're saying to yourself, well, how are these women going to meet these physical requirements? The physical requirements is a barrier. It is to keep you out. And if you understand racism, you understand what that is about. We're going to keep this club. We want to keep it our way. And so we're going to decide who gets in and who stays out. Now, I can tell you, I'm up at 5 o'clock on the treadmill, and we've all seen police officers we could take. They have to meet a physical requirement, but the study's done. And Reverend Norris, I don't exactly agree with your feelings about data, because data can do some amazing things for us. And the studies show that women are not impacted by their physicality in the job. Shoot to kill, when you stack up women and men and you look at shoot to kill and who's involved, men and women police officers are at the opposite ends of the spectrum. And the mentally ill, the reason we need more social workers within the policing model is because of the number of individuals killed who have mental illness. We can hardly even say the word mental illness. It's in our families, it's in our workplaces. People with mental illness are people we love. And they have every right to a life of value in which they can thrive, and they need support and social workers and family and a community and a culture that embraces. It is time for us to zero in, to ask for what we need in this consent decree that is now in Cleveland. And as a group, this group, one of the things that you can insist upon with your collective power is to say to that task force in this city, in this county, and even the focus that the governor has on Cleveland, that we need more women, we need more people of color, and we need more social workers embedded within the policing model. It's in our hands. There is so much that we can do, and we have to count on each other to be able to do it, to lift our voices collectively so that we will not be a tale of two cities. While everyone is excited about what's to come in 2016 and what's around the corner, we have got to advocate for those who are last, lost, and least among us. Thank you.
Q&A. We hadn't planned on this, but we've been blessed with two very articulate, concise speakers. I heard some of the discussion at noon today, and we had a great Q&A session. Ms. Mitchell, would you be willing to respond to some questions? Reverend Norris, would you be willing to respond to questions? Okay, why don't you both come up here, and we'll entertain questions. Michelle, could you possibly take one of these mics and enable anyone in the audience to answer any of the questions that we have? I think they're okay, yes. Okay. I just want to get started here by sort of reacting a bit to what I just heard. First of all, it was not entirely true that, well, okay, it was true. I did propose each of you. The program today, by the way, was absolutely outstanding, I felt. And there were so many wonderful issues, and I had absolutely nothing to do with the program. But we had a couple invitations out that sort of felt, you know, that we wanted, and we sort of neglected the 4 o'clock plenary. Finally, 3 or 4 weeks ago, we realized, wait, we don't have our closing plenary taken care of. And immediately, we realized, what's the most important issue that's happening right now? It's in Cleveland, in terms of social justice. It's improving police-community relations. This time, we've got to do it, and we've got to make it last. Okay? And then, you know, as was said in some of the feedback, the workshop I gave this morning on human needs, where I was talking about the sources of injustice are oppression, dehumanization, and exploitation. Someone said, what about racism? Yes, of course. I mean, what is the most fundamental historical source of oppression in this society? It's racism, specifically racism against people of African origin from the heritage of slavery in this country. Okay, not just all the other forms that racism takes, but specifically the legacy of slavery in this country. That's the most fundamental source of oppression in this society. If, of course, you don't talk about the oppression of women, which goes back quite a ways. So when I heard that Ms. Mitchell's organization was leading a wonderful seminar on racism and learned that Michelle Lard children go there and that she knows, you know, the agency well, this was the logical speaker. So now here we have the juxtaposition of racism and of one of its most serious manifestations, lousy police-community relations that leads to death, false imprisonment, all kinds of serious, unfortunate cradle, you know, prison pipelines. These are really important issues. This is your chance to speak on this issue, to ask questions of these speakers about what we as a profession and we as an agency community and we as a university community can begin to do about these issues. So, who would like to speak? And I will just back off here because I think you want to hear from them. Thank you.
Okay, I know this question will probably be a little controversial, but I just wanted to know, I know that we are pretty good about standing up, maybe not in Cleveland, about human issues, about dealing with the police and things like that, because I've watched TV and I've seen other programs. But what I have not seen is what we're doing in this city and across the country about eradicating HIV and AIDS in my lifetime. So I would like to challenge and maybe ask a question about what your agency or what your coalition is doing specifically about the issues of prevention, so we're preventing people from becoming infected, and then dealing with people who are living with the virus in terms of maybe advocating for the criminalization law or advocating for affordable medications.
Yes, thank you for that question. Many of the churches have support groups for those with HIV and give support. What we wanted to do with the march, not just march, but we're proposing a symposium following the march that will address a lot of issues: homelessness, HVI, you got mass incarceration, you have poor educational system, healthcare system. So we've been meeting with the Congresswoman Marsha Fudge office. We have their support. So in May, once we do the march, we will have a county symposium, probably in South Euclid. There, Notre Dame College, we're trying to get that site, and we'll have facilitators so we can just sit down and talk about race and lots of issues and come up with some solution, not just pointing the fingers, but trying to work it out. Thank you so much for the question.
I just wanted to make 2 comments. I wanted to thank the Reverend for validating us as social workers. I don't think we hear that enough. A lot of times we feel like nobody really knows how much we do, how much we spend, how much we don't sleep, how much we eat, taking care of other people. So thank you for that. For Ms. Mitchell, I had a comment. Agree with everything you said. I wanted to expand it though. I think that as a clinical social worker, the mental illness that we see in our population is largely a byproduct of racism, poverty, suffering. I don't think it's organic as much as it is people lose hope when they can't find a way out, when every door is slammed, when they're constantly vilified from the cradle to the grave, as you say. So I think one of the things we need to be cognizant of is a lot of mental illness is preventable if you get early intervention. You know, because we're not talking about organic brain syndrome 90% of the time. We're talking about people who have maladaptive coping skills, have turned to drugs, alcohol. You know, people aren't inherently crazy, but you can sure make them crazy. You can run them crazy. The last point is, I think we don't look at the mental illness in the police department. Racism is mental illness. Let's not just look at the victim, let's look at the culprit. Thank you.
Top button, yeah.
Okay, is it on? I would say that, you know, the ACE study, which was a 12-year longitudinal study conducted at a Kaiser and 17,000 individuals in the study, but that adverse childhood experience study really did show and prove that adversity, particularly in early childhood, and it is what I call, there's a disorder that I call broken heart syndrome. And that's what you're talking about. And it's not in the, what is it, the DSM? DSM-5, it's not in there, but I could give you, we could all come together and write down all of the characteristics of broken heart syndrome. And I also think that within the police department, you know, what we see is this paramilitary profile that is being sought, the ultra alpha male that's being sought after. And there is, you know, the DOJ shows a high incidence of racism. When you look at DOJ reports from across the country, you see that there. And it does have to be part of what is disrupted and that change being driven through. And as a community in Cleveland, we have to insist upon that. I mean, our police department does not look like our community, not even close. You know, and when consent decrees are put in place, that is what mandates. It's a mandate for the police department to have to move in the direction of that equalizing. And the consent decree, the DOJ report speaks to some of this.
Let me just say, we know the funding in mental health has been cut in terms of the state, in that there's not enough social service agencies in this county because of funding. CPI was closed. And in terms of the police, this is kind of like a culture buddy system, and et cetera, starting with the academy who trains those policemen to be insensitive to people of color and to target. We saw that in Ferguson. And I think we have to be very careful, because when we say they all had mental illness, you know, that's sometimes misdiagnosis in many cases. But still, a person, a human being, whether they bipolar, you know, like my uncle or my mother, they don't deserve to be shot and killed. I think when we, the policemen, ought to be protecting and serving their citizens. I just don't add up for me.
I wanted to say thank you as well. I want to echo her sentiments, and I want to thank Miss Margaret for opening her doors to the youth who come out of foster care. And I know that social work encompasses a very broad area, but I think that we need to get together and recreate the village, because I'm not so sure that I understand where the churches take place in helping us to reduce some of these outcomes, because children who emancipate from the child welfare system do end up in homeless and in prison. And this last year, we had about 113 come out, and 7 of the guys that were on my caseload experienced some time in jail. They're young. We know that adolescence does not end until age 25 now, and so I think we all need to have a little more education about the development of the brain. But I want to hear from, I know that you're doing great work, so I want to scratch some of your DNA off and hopefully sprinkle it to other places so that we can have more housing for youth that come out of care. But I want to ask Pastor Norris or Reverend Norris, what, if you know anything about the Religious Coalition, what are they doing to help the youth who are coming out of foster care?
The churches are doing a lot. I mean, in terms of foster care and meeting needs. What I think needs to understand, each church is independent, and different denomination has their way of social ministry. But the churches in this community are doing a lot from clothing to feeding the hungry to AA, alcohol, drugs, foster care. They're doing so many things. But what we see is that poverty, if you look at the community in Cleveland, and we know that probably there are out of every one in 6 families, you got poverty. So that creates a whole lot of dynamics even for churches, and that's why we need social workers, involved.
I also wanted to say that I think, transition-age youth and homelessness is increasing in our county. We are seeing chronic homelessness, which is largely older adults, decreasing, and there's been a lot of focus there. But youth homelessness is on the rise, and family homelessness is on the rise. And youth and families are 2 areas where we've just not really paid that much attention. 3-4 years ago, when we started down this work, I mean, there was literally nothing. I mean, and sometimes we had places that people were hostile. And so we've got to continue to shine a light, because this is a significant issue, and a lot has to be done in this space. So many of our young people don't even meet the federal definition of homelessness because of their age and the time you have to be homeless. Why do you want somebody to be homeless?
I just wanted to go back to the thing about the police department. My understanding, and I could be wrong, but after the Department of Justice came and gave their report, there's supposed to be a panel right now in place to help make some changes, and I'm curious if there is, who's sitting at the table?
Yeah, do we have time? Okay. Okay, the Department of Justice and the city administration is now at the table. This is the problem. This is a 10-year problem historically. Department of Justice have been here twice, and we didn't fix it. We didn't fix the problem because the community did not have a voice in speaking in part of that consent decree. So what we're attempting to do is say to Mayor Jackson, Department of Justice, that we as a community taxpayers want a voice. We want to know what's going on, what's in that consent decree, and that you just don't give us something and say that's it without a voice from the community. Because ultimately, they're going to have a monitor for 5 years, okay? And that monitor is going to have to go by what is in that legal contract that they agree on. So if community policing is not done right, recruitment, as she was referred to about people of color and women's, is not in that contract. Things and issues that we have concern about, racial profiling, is not in that contract, then we're back, in other issues. And how you actually going to do with that? Because we're going to have to live with the results of that. And we have been living with that almost a decade or more, going back to Mayor White administration. And so we want to get it right. I know the mayor want to get it right, but you need the community. We need to help Mayor Jackson, Department of Justice, get it right. Now, this march for people is not to recall the mayor, because if you get rid of him, you got the same problem. Okay, not to recall the McGrath or Flat. It is to have community input so they would hear your voices. And that's what we're saying. So we're not going to just sit down by and let you do your thing, okay? And we don't have a say so. Huh? We're, good question. When they heard that 1,000 of you all, and I hope you all be down there because I need you, City Hall is jumping now. They don't know where to go. Because this will be the largest mass people of color. We need everybody, diversity. People of color. This is not just a black issue. This is everybody issue.
Isn't this a peach
right?
color?
Yeah, right. Okay. So I get an email from the Department of Justice, Federal Building. Reverend, an email. I want to meet with you April the 1st, Wednesday, at 3 to 5 p.m. You know why? Because we're going to put a 1,000 plus booths on the ground. Okay? And that's why we need you. Because they know that numbers vote.
Yes, I wanted to ask you, I read this online that you were doing this march. Right here it says, meet us at the free stamp. Where's the free stamp at?
I know, I haven't been downtown. Yeah, it's right down on 9th Street, right near the City Hall, about less than a block away. There's a big old stamp, 9th and Lakeside.
And it's a
Big rubber
there.
stamp, huge, big old stamp. There's gonna be so many of us around there, you'll find us.
Yeah,
no, we'll be
I'm
there.
planning on going. I saw that on the web.
Well,
We're going to be wrapping this up in just a second, but I wanted to point out something that tomorrow's a chance for you to be part of what truly is a new civil rights movement in this country. And, you know, it's the kind of thing you should bring your grandchildren to, your sisters, your brothers. Get on Facebook tonight, say you're going to be there tomorrow, City Hall. And you'll have a chance to hear again from many of the speakers. One of the speakers who's going to wrap up this session, representing the Conference on Social Welfare itself, which encourages its members, its participants to come tomorrow, is Michelle Lard. She's going to wrap this up by giving you some information. So go ahead.